Hey, good morning. It's Josh Watcott here at the Partridge Group, and we get the fine opportunity of interviewing and speaking with one of our own, Alex Cabrero. It's so good to have you here. I've been looking forward to this moment. You're a great dude. You do great stories involving police, firefighters, wellness, and I'm excited to have you here. So thanks for coming.
And Josh, thank you for the invite and for your trust. Through the years, I've gotten to know you a little bit, and I know where your heart is, and I know you care about this topic. And man, it's such an important topic, especially after this past year.
Yeah, it really is, and the whole reason behind this podcast, Alex, is I wanted to do something a little bit different that we could send out to organizations, that we could send out to agencies that they could use for wellness programs and put it in their peer support newsletters and different things like that. And you just give guys an opportunity to hear about others' experiences in the community with law enforcement, with police. And I bring you here because of what I mentioned. You've always police and fire and wellness and those type of stories have always been in your book, and you've always put them as a priority. And I'm just curious, why do you do that? What's behind it?
I've thought about that myself, and a lot of times, especially with the past year, where law enforcement is getting beat up a lot.
Yeah.
People say, "Why do you care so much?" And Josh, I couldn't do that job.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I respect and praise the officers, men and women, who get out there on the line and do a tough job that's going to beat them up mentally, physically.
Yeah.
When they go home, it affects their relationships, their marriages, their time with their kids. And God bless, I'm just happy that someone is out there doing that job. Now, of course, if an officer messes up and does something wrong, I still have to do that story, where sometimes it doesn't
Sure.
put law enforcement in the best light. But I always tell my bosses, if we're gonna beat them up when they do something wrong, we got to do something when they do it right. We got to take care of those stories, because I think those positive stories are just as important, if not more important, than the negative stuff. And in getting to know a few officers really well, I had no idea how often they take this stuff home, and how often it beats them up days, weeks, months, years down the line.
Yeah.
If they don't get this off their chest, because it's tough.
It's tough.
And I go out on a lot of these scenes as well, all across the state, where something terrible has happened, and it affects me, and I'm not even involved. I'm not even seeing the bad stuff that sometimes you guys see. And mental health is just, in all aspects of society, it's so important right now, but especially with law enforcement, because a lot of times I hear from some officers, off the record even, that they feel like they don't get the support from their department. If they're at a smaller department, they don't feel like it's encouraged for them to get the help, or there's that macho image where I have to be a robot, I have to be this bad A person, who nothing bothers, because that's what the public expects. But the more we talk about this stuff, I think the better it is for everybody. Better for the police force, better for society. And there has to be an understanding from society that, man, without law enforcement, it's chaos. Without these men and women doing this very tough job, who are you going to call when something?
Where would we be?
Right, where would we be? And I think we saw a glimpse of that a little bit this summer with some of the civil unrest. And yes, those topics are important to talk about, and
Sure.
some change needs to happen for sure. But you saw in some communities when maybe law enforcement wasn't around, and what could happen so quickly. You saw up in Seattle, that whole Chaz zone or whatever,
Right,
and
right.
absolute chaos, Josh. And man, law enforcement is a tough job. I'm happy you retired. I'm happy you're out of it. But I'm happy you also have the experience you have to help those officers still in there and those coming up, because hopefully they get the help that maybe you didn't have or didn't acknowledge or recognize early on.
Which I think you make a great point. I went through some of my own problems many years ago in about 2010, where I suffered from some severe depression and anxiety and other things that I didn't really realize were associated with this job until friends and people just started saying, "Hey, you're not the person you used to be, and you need to get a grip." But we didn't have peer support team programs. We didn't have EAP programs. We didn't those things weren't available. We still stuck with the suck it up, rub some dirt on the wound, and go about your business to the next call, until finally, I realized I was in some serious trouble. And it took me a long time to be able to find a therapist, like you said, that really, understood the culture, that really understood what we do, that really had an understanding of of our jobs and the severity of the traumas that are exposed to police and firefighters. And once I did that, I said, man, there's got to be other people on the other side of this badge to help these folks. And that's when I made the turn that I was going to go back to school and I was going to get my degree and I was going to be a therapist for these folks because it's so needed, like you said. It's just, there's not enough.
And as you probably started talking to other officers, Josh, you probably saw that there are a lot of them that feel just like you do.
Yeah, yeah. It was a real pivotal moment that I said, yeah, we've got to do something different. As you've talked with these other firefighters and police officers, when you bring up the fact of mental health and wellness, and do they ever talk to you just off the camera and say, we wish we had certain programs, or we wish that we could go talk to somebody, or we wish that we could? Does any of this ever get brought up?
Sometimes, yes. Maybe not so much on a scene, but if I'm doing something at an awards ceremony and an officer grabs me afterwards and talks to me about maybe a story I've done in the past about mental health, they'll say, man, that really hit home because I'm dealing with some stuff. Yeah. I play on a baseball team, and we have a few law enforcement officers on that team, and it's after games sometimes where this stuff starts coming up. And what I hear a lot is, man, I didn't know anybody else felt like this. I didn't know. Sure. I thought there was something wrong with me. Is what I hear a lot from those officers, that they thought there was something wrong with them, and in talking about it, they realize there's so much more. There's so many more people out there who feel just as they do, and sometimes just that talking amongst peers in law enforcement, because no one else understands the job you do except another officer or another firefighter. It's hard to just talk to somebody who doesn't maybe get it per se, Yeah. But yeah, I would hear from them often that they were surprised that there are others who feel just like them, because they say that sometimes they felt broke or lost, or they were in this haze or fog, and they didn't know how to get out of it. Sometimes a vacation doesn't work. You think you're going to get away for a vacation for a week or two, and it doesn't clear your head the way you thought it does, is what I've heard from one officer I know very well. So he would take vacations a lot and call in sick a lot, thinking if I just took some time off, I'll be okay when I come back. But it wasn't working because you have to take that next step.
Which I think you hit on a few key points right there, is especially that we do that as police. Yeah. And these are things that I'm going around and teaching supervisors and peers as a part of being here at the Partridge Group, is recognizing that your employee is calling in too sick, or recognizing that their reports are not written really well, or they're backing into polls and having more accidents than they should. Things like this to begin to recognize and ask, hey, Officer Jones, you're not feeling real good. We need to get you in and see somebody and make that encouragement and make that next step. So that's kind of what we're trying to do, is make people comfortable to come in and seek some therapy and get some help. Because, I mean, my she shed in here, it's a nice look. I mean, it's not uncomfortable at all to be in here. And we do good things here. We get people well. We tear them down. We get them some help, and we put them out the door healthy. And that's what we're trying to achieve.
I didn't know so you can notice that from a department standpoint, where you notice somebody calling in sick more, they're getting a little few things like hitting a pole. Yeah. That's great that there's a process in place to at least educate managers and administrators to look out for this stuff. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's going to be great, because I think as supervisors, and not everybody knows what to look for when people are suffering from early stages of having some mental health issues. And so I think that'll be really helpful for people.
One thing that and an officer I know really well that I play ball with, he says something that really helped, is that his department makes it a priority to also have the spouses come in to talk.
Great point.
Separate from their husband or their wife, that there's actually a support group for the spouses where they can come in and talk about things going on at home. And he says that's something that the department started a few years ago, and his wife told me, boy, that really worked, because I didn't realize there are other wives like this, and what she can look for, at home, and having that support at home is, well, it's everything. Without that support at home, you feel like you're getting beat up on at work. You come home and maybe things aren't clicking the way you want them with your spouse, and you don't get that escape. So having something for also spouses, I think, is part of the puzzle for sure.
Yeah, and we're gonna incorporate some of that too, because I think what you said, the support at home. My wife went through more hell than I probably did half the time, not realizing that I wasn't there and not home and my own kids. So I want to ask you, I think, like you said, you go to these calls for service, and it impacts your inner soul. What do you, you don't even realize that you're having some vicarious trauma. You're being exposed. You don't have to see the event, right. But just having a relationship with this officer having this conversation. It affects us. It affects you.
Yeah.
But how do you find the resilience? How do you work on your own mental health and make sure that you're good?
Yeah, I go to batting cages a lot. That's kind of been my escape, playing ball. If it's a tough day, I'll go to a batting cage after work and just take it out of baseball. That's been my escape. But sometimes it's deeper than that. I joke about that, but sometimes it's deeper than that. And we do have something at KSO where we can speak to a psychologist or a mental health professional. There is an employee assistance program, an EAP in place for us to do that, and we've used it a lot, especially the past year with everything going on. But also, I think journalists feel sometimes the same way that law enforcement officers do, is that, I have to be the journalist. I have to be the one that can calm everything down and be professional and tell a competent story on TV and not let it affect me. But man, Josh, every time I go to a scene and a kid is killed or something bad happens and you hear that mom screaming, that's stuff you don't forget.
No, it impacts you.
Oh, it does. And you see it on the officers' faces. And I was sharing a story with you before we recorded. We were up in Logan where this 4-year-old girl was raped and then killed by a family member. And they couldn't find a body. And eventually they did. And there was this officer there who'd been there. He was on his last week before he retired. He'd been there 20 plus years. And we have a picture of him just holding his head and looking up at the sky like, what's going on in this world? And I reached out to him afterwards, and we actually did a story with this detective, and he said, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. None of it makes sense sometimes. And so it definitely affects these officers. I mean, and society sometimes needs to understand that you're human. Yeah. You're human, and this stuff affects you too. And us journalists, we see that often in urban and rural and the suburbs, that it all affects you all in a certain sort of way. And it's tough. Yeah, it's tough. But speaking about it more and more, especially with hardcore journalists that have been there a while, it's so important for us to talk about it. And sometimes we don't want to look weak, especially as journalists.
Isn't that the stigma with everybody?
Right.
You see it in police, fire,
right,
and all those services, and it's the same with you folks.
Right, especially on the police scene where it's like, how are we going to say we're weak as journalists? How are we going to admit that when we're dealing with something where officers are way more involved with it? It's a balancing act, but talking about, you don't have to be so macho, I think is so important. It's that stigma, Josh, for sure.
Well, I'm glad that you're able to recognize it because, it's not just about police and fire. It's about how all of us as a community can do better in addressing mental health, whether it's with you, whether it's with me. I think it's okay to be not okay. It's okay to say, hey, I need to go in and chat with somebody. If you don't, you end up in problems. Like I saw within my own self, you can probably see it within your own self. We become irritable, we become angry, we become grumpy, we stomp our feet. Your wife says, what the hell's going on?
Yes.
I mean, just all those type of things. So I'm glad that you've brought some of that here with you today and was able to be vulnerable and share some of those feelings that you experienced too.
I like that. It's okay to not be okay. Boy, that makes all the sense in the world, Josh, because yes, I've come to notice that when I'm feeling irritable, and I bring that home, you're right, it's okay to not be okay. My wife recognizes that too, that sometimes, all right, let's just let Alex do his thing. But she'll ask me now, and she's to the point where she'll ask me, hey, you doing okay? What'd you deal with? Do you need to go away? Do you need to talk to someone? Because it's okay to not be okay. And it's okay to cry. It's okay for men to cry. I
bawl all the time, bro.
So do I now.
I bawl all the time.
So do I. Watching a movie, there could be some part, and E.T., and I'm going to forget about it. I'm done. No. So it's, it's real. And I hope that as we continue on as society, I hope that officers continue to realize that, especially in those smaller departments, Josh, especially in those rural departments where officers are often on their own, backup is hours away, and they feel they have to be robotic and macho because they're out in the middle by themselves. And if they appear weak in their mind, they're going to think that the society and the public won't trust them to do their job, that there's something wrong with them. So I think especially in those smaller rural departments, this mental health is crucial and beneficial, and you hope that there's a budget there where they can get some help,
Well, and the other thing that's nice, that FOP, regardless if you're a member or not, but you're a certified law enforcement officer, will pay for 4 sessions for free.
That's awesome.
So there's help there. It's just getting people to realize that 4 sessions is barely going to break into some concerns, but at least it's there. We can come in, you can have the services paid for, and you can begin to see how healthy you can become by even, like you said, just talking about things, getting things out there, and loading it back. But Alex, I want to give you kudos. I appreciate you being here today. You do a lot of good for the community.
Thank you. It's important. It is. And like I said before, I couldn't do the job. I could not do the job, especially what I know now and what you deal with on a day in and day out basis. But I am so appreciative that there are men and women out there who can do the job and who want to do the job for all the right reasons. Are there a few bad apples? Of course, in any business, in reporting too, in journalism too. But I don't know the statistics, but 90+%, 95% of officers get into it for the right reasons. They want to help people, and sometimes it's okay for them to need a little help themselves. It's real. It's real, Josh.
And I'm always, of course, shedding a tear here and there because I think the world of you, and you always do your best to share, positive stories.
It's important.
And even though you guys get a bad rap here and there, but you for the most part are always doing something kind for the community and for law enforcement and fire. So thanks for coming in today. I appreciate it, Alex.
Anytime.
From the bottom of my heart. So
anytime, Josh, and I'll be bugging you more often in the
Come on
future.
in, dude. We got coffee. We got donuts.
Of course you have donuts. If this is a law enforcement place, right?
No, but
thank you.
In all honesty, thanks for being here today.
An honor. Thank you for having me. And anytime. This is important, and I'm so happy that there are places for some of these officers to go.
Yeah.
Some of these firefighters to go. Chatting with firefighters too, who deal with some of these situations and where there's a loss of life.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not exclusive. I remember I did a real quick, if we have a couple minutes, a story with a Salt Lake City firefighter who sat down in a park and we shared our experiences and call after call after call, medical after medical after medical, and he remembers it was just getting to him to the point where he clearly told me he was sitting on his bed with a gun in his mouth.
Yeah.
and couldn't pull that trigger, and thank goodness he didn't pull that trigger. Decided to get help right then and there, and it worked. And I think that's the other thing, Josh, is that talking to somebody and getting help, it works. It's not voodoo. It's not just going through the motions. It really can help.
Yeah, and I think you hit on a key point. I mean, therapy's having this relationship. 80% of what you do in therapy is the relationship with the client, and 15-20% is really the techniques we use. So it's finding the right person, getting involved, and by all means, if we here at the Partridge Group can do anything to help anybody, these people know where we can find us. Our cards are out there. Our business is pretty well known for law enforcement. So, Alex, you're a stud, dude.
Thanks, man.
Thanks for coming in today.
Anytime, Josh.
Have
Thank
a good
you.
one, man.
Okay.